education isn't about being able to just score all the right things on all the right tests. It's about really being more of a whole individual. I want my kids to be lifelong learners. I don't want them to feel like, okay, school's over, the bell rang, we're done learning now. We're always learning. It doesn't matter if it's Saturday or if it's nighttime.
Welcome back to the OpenEd podcast. I'm your sometimes host, Ella Richmond, and today I'm joined by Charlynn Chambers. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing great. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be a lot of fun. So you're a mom of 4. This is your 5th year doing homeschool. And before that, you sent your kids to charter school, correct?
Yes.
Very cool. So what initially got you interested in charter? And then can you walk me through the process of going from charter to now homeschool? And was that something that you were interested in and or aware of before?
Education is important to me. Having kids that are really taught how to think and not just what to think is something that's really important to me. And so I wanted my kids to be in a school where they were being taught great things and being taught more how to be thinking critically versus what to think about all of the more politically and divisive topics. And so I really liked this charter because it had smaller classes and it just seemed to not get into the more controversial stuff as much as some schools. And so I was very deliberate in making sure that my son got into kindergarten so that all my kids could just go to the charter. And it was great. We had a great experience with his first year of kindergarten, but then the pandemic hit and his kindergarten year ended early. They closed the schools and he did online school for the rest of that kindergarten year through the charter. And then that summer, I just went back and forth. My sister-in-law, actually, she started homeschooling right away when the pandemic hit. And I was like, no, I don't want to, I'm not interested in that. Like, good for them. I'm glad that's working for them, but not something that I'm particularly wanting to do. But then as I saw things unfold and just thought a lot about the needs of my kids, and one of my big things was that having a love of learning is really important to me. And I had this sweet little kindergartner who loved to learn and loved to explore and all of these things. And then bringing in especially in Oregon, all of the different requirements and things that came with the pandemic that made going to school just so much more complicated. Really, I knew that was coming. And so it really kind of pushed me to reconsider what was going to be the right choice, because it was really important to me that my kids didn't lose their love of learning, and especially at such a young age. So that's one thing that really made me think harder about it. There's a few different reasons that I decided to homeschool, but definitely the pandemic pushed me into it. And then as I just considered the needs of my kids, it's stuck. And our philosophy has been every year we'll reassess and decide what the right choice is for our family. But this has been a great choice for our family thus far. And it's interesting because at first I didn't know about all of the different neurodivergence in my kids. But now that we're homeschooling and I see some of those different challenges, I am so glad that we're homeschooling, because I can be able to give them the attention that they need and teach them in the way that works best for them, rather than even in a small class. You're still one of, like, I think his kindergarten class had like 17 kids in it, which is a great size, but you can't cater to one of the 17 who's falling behind or struggling to understand as much. And so I love that I get to really customize their education in a way that works really well for them.
Yeah, I love that. So you mentioned on this journey, like, you were pretty well informed. You know, you're talking about the policies, you're talking about the requirements. So sometimes as a parent, it's easy to take a back seat and like to not know about any of those things, to send your kid to school and to be like, okay, this is checking the boxes, or like, this is educating my kid. What prompted you initially to be interested in understanding, you know, okay, what is my kid learning? What are the things that are happening at the school, to be involved, I guess?
So I had a great public school experience, honestly. I was in public school for all of my education and I loved it. I had a great time. I had great friends. I went to a great school. Um, and so homeschooling was just not something that I really put a lot into. But then as I started to see things change over the last decade, I feel like there's just a lot more like those priorities. I feel like in some ways have shifted in public school. And because kids and parents are separated for so much of the day, they're not able to learn some of those valuable life skills because they're not with their parents all the time, because they're at school so much. But then the other side of that is I feel like schools have definitely made some shifts in where they're trying to teach things that should really be left to the parents to be teaching. I've seen more and more of those things come out in curriculums. My sister-in-law that started homeschooling at the pandemic, she was a huge proponent in her school district before they homeschooled as well, trying to really be aware of what the kids were being taught. And she went through all of the different lessons. She spent many hours going through things in her district, the actual books that were required teaching for her school. And I was really shocked when I heard some of the lessons that the kids were going to be taught that are just not things that I wanted my kids to be taught or things that I wanted to be able to know what they're being taught so we could have a good conversation about it and they could be able to see more than one perspective. So that's definitely one part of it. I just feel like there's so much that the schools are need to teach and are required to teach and then choose to teach that it doesn't necessarily line up anymore with the values of and what I see as important that I want to teach to my kids. Because for me, education isn't about being able to just score all the right things on all the right tests. It's about really being more of a whole individual. And it just seems like that wasn't going to happen as much as I wanted it to in public school. Does that
Yeah.
kind of answer your question?
No, that does. The fact that your sister-in-law went so deep into exploring this and researching this and actually reading through everything, I bet that was quite insightful to her. Because I mean, that's a lot of work to sit down and say, okay, what exactly is my kid learning? And to have an open mind while doing it, being like, okay, well, maybe this is good enough. Maybe like these things are going to help expand my kid in some ways, but also like really questioning whether or not it aligns with your values as a parent, I think is one of the most important things. So like obviously having an open mind and saying like, okay, well, maybe I wouldn't teach my kid all of this, but like maybe some of it's valuable. But then on the other side, okay, what actually contradicts with our values as a family? What do I want to have input in? What do I want to be the one to tell my kid about? And how do I make sure that I have kind of ownership over that? Because I guess
Yeah.
that's a part of being a parent, right? You're leading your kid. You're trying to help them to become a responsible and successful individual in the world. Like, if there are things that you think that might contradict that, that end, that aim, that goal to be free, fully formed humans, like that's definitely something to be aware of and to note and also probably to do something about. When you started homeschooling, so you get into COVID, is it right away that you're like, okay, well maybe I should look into homeschool, or do you kind of see what's going on, do the work and the coursework that's assigned for a little bit, and then start to make your way toward more of the homeschooling over time?
I had no problem when we started doing the online school through the end of the school year. When the pandemic started, and I was totally okay with online school, like just because it's what needed to happen. But I did notice that it was a lot harder for kids to really be able to focus, and there was a lot of things that were lacking. And then as I studied it out more and looked at the different requirements, like just different like social distancing and policies that were going to be in place that would be there to keep kids healthy physically, but it got me concerned that it wasn't going to help them be as healthy emotionally and mentally in the way that some of these required policies were being set up. And so it just really made me reconsider what was going to be the right path for my kids.
Did you lean heavily on your sister-in-law who had already done all of the homeschool when you started?
I didn't. And in fact, if she listens to this episode, she's probably going to be surprised that I mentioned her twice already because her kids are a little bit older than mine. And I knew, I didn't at first. I don't know that I talked to her about it a ton, but I do have a few friends that homeschool, and I just kind of thought about it. I remember there was a group that got together and they were just going to talk about different school options. And so I went to that meeting with it was like a couple of homeschool parents and then a bunch of people who are interested in homeschooling and just kind of wanted to look it up. And I think she might have sent me an email or something saying, hey, we're doing this meeting if you want to get together and learn more. And so that was, I think, maybe one of the first moments that it felt like, okay, like maybe we could actually do this and maybe I should consider it more. And then just over the course of the summer, like the next few months, I just kind of kept looking into it and thinking about it, praying about it, studying it out, just trying to figure out what is going to be the right choice for my family. And that's where we landed. We realized that I don't know what'll happen for future years, but this year it's just going to be right to homeschool. And I'm so glad that I did, because in Oregon, it was really hard because schools were constantly on the brink of being shut down or getting, like, they actually were shut down, or there was a threat of having to go back to online again. And I remember watching all of my friends and moms groups on Facebook, stuff like that, being so stressed out and trying to figure out, are we going to be online next week? Are we going to be home? Do I have to figure out childcare? So many different added stressors that I just remember being so glad that I didn't have to deal with. It felt like such a huge relief to me to feel like, you know what? I can be in charge of their education and I can do this. And I'm so glad I am, and not having all the extra added stress of just being told what has to be done.
What were the initial challenges whenever you were trying to figure out, okay, how do I homeschool, or what does this look like for my family?
So that was around the time where I found out that my husband had ADHD. And as I learned more about ADHD, I realized I had ADHD. And then I saw it in my son, whom I was teaching, and realized that, but it's interesting. So really, everybody in my family is ADHD, but it manifests so much differently for each one of us. And so for my son, it looked like it was really hard for him to sit down and focus and go through a lesson. He's not generally he wasn't one of the hyperactive kids that was all over the place. That wasn't him. And so it really surprised me when we had so many meltdowns over just write these 3 words, write the 2 sentences, And I struggled. And then I realized that he just needed things to be approached from a little bit of a different angle. And that was huge, and kind of started my shift in realizing that I could actually customize their needs more. And it didn't have to look like public school at home. It could be done more according to the way that I saw fit the needs of my family.
Whoa, that's a really interesting unlock. The idea that, okay, I don't actually have to replicate public school. I don't have to replicate traditional school. I don't have to be a teacher in the same way that people consider teaching to happen in school. I can personalize this. What was that unlock like for you? And then what has it been like to customize your kids' education? What does a normal day in the life look like for you and your family now?
It kind of unraveled a little bit over the following couple of years. I feel like every year kind of looked a little bit differently. But as I kept learning, it was interesting. I read a few different books and talked to different people, got different perspectives. And as I learned, as I gained more understanding about why traditional public school was set up the way that it was, it helped me to understand what was needed and then what was okay for me to do differently because I don't have those same needs homeschooling my kids one-on-one at my own home versus needing to educate literally thousands of kids, millions of kids if we're talking about a national level, and having to streamline that process is why so much of public school was set up the way that it was. Like there's so many things that are set up in public school which make sense for the system that they need to have, but that I realized it didn't need to be that way for my own home. Like it didn't make sense that I had to teach things at exactly a certain time because that's what my state was doing that year. And I realized it's okay for them to learn things at a different time and in a different order. And I feel like the battle, the internal struggle that every homeschool parent feels is like, am I doing enough, right? Am I doing it right? Am I doing too much or not enough or whatever it is? And so at first, I feel like my first year of homeschooling, I really did a lot of curriculum and really kind of stuck with it and was trying really hard to like go through these lessons every day and do this lesson and that lesson and sit down and it was a lot more like public school at home, but just one-on-one, which has value. And then my next year was a little more flexible. And then we ended up buying a house and we had to remodel. And very quickly, we kind of got thrown into a lot of chaos. And so it kind of forced us to adjust how we were educating our kids a little bit differently. But I saw so much value in it because we were working on remodeling our house before we moved. And so suddenly a lot more of the kids' education looked like real, like hands-on life skills that like they were helping paint and helping like rip out the floor and pull off baseboards because they wanted to. Like they, they weren't just the little workhorses. They were so thrilled to be there and to be learning these new skills. And as I thought about it, I realized that, they're so young, right? First off, it's different when it's elementary school versus high school. They're so young and they learn so much just through experience. And for them to learn the value of hard work and to be able to see a wall that they painted and they can do it. And it gave them so much confidence. And I saw them developing so many skills that were truly going to serve their life, in my opinion, in a more helpful way than if they had sat down and had one more curriculum lesson. If they had had one more math lesson at a first grade kindergarten level, that would not have served them as well as being able to be like, wow, I just pulled up all this stuff or I just painted this wall. And they felt so great about it. And they were learning so much as we were going through just that whole different process. And so now, so I was like really rigid on curriculum. And then it was kind of like, there was very little curriculum that second year, but there was still a ton of learning. And then in my third and fourth year, like I feel like I kind of like found my way a little bit more back into the middle. And I feel like that is the constant journey of homeschooling, is there's so much ebb and flow. Every year looks a little different. And it's often that you might go more this way and then more that way and then more kind of find your way in the middle. And I feel like that's been a lot of what it has been for us. So I pretty much do a pretty solid mix of like we do a morning basket and a morning menu, and we have like certain things that we want to cover every day. But then we also do a lot of following their interests and learning as we go, because a lot of our life, I feel like it's not just, I wouldn't consider myself an unschooler, but I'm more eclectic in taking a lot of things from a lot of different ideas, but there is a lot more to be said than I realized for intentional living and learning as you go, that my kids have learned so much because we're constantly around each other and we have more time, that if you're doing it intentionally, then you can fit in so many worthwhile lessons. That it's one thing to just play all day, but it's another thing to have time to play. And then when you see certain things happening as a mom, to be able to capitalize on that moment and say, did you guys notice that this happened? Or I saw this and it reminded me of this other thing. Or, hey, let's not just make breakfast, but have the time, like today, to spend an hour making pancakes because we didn't have to rush off to the bus or whatever, and to be really intentional. Today we made pancakes and I told the kids we didn't really have time for it. So if we were going to do it, then it had to be part of school and I needed them to all be really involved and really intentional with it. And so my son was working on his leadership skills and he was in charge. And so he was giving directions to his sisters. And I reminded them, like, you guys can do this as long as you can be thoughtful and respectful in how you're interacting with each other. And so he was practicing like those important delegation skills and not just bossing people, right? But actually giving people a clear direction and problem solving. And then, with my 6-year-old, like sometimes she struggles with dexterity and being patient and, like lining things up. And so we worked on, like, I took the time to slow down and we talked really clearly about like dump this pancake here and this pancake there. And this is how far apart they should be to space them. And it's just more intentional living that there's so many lessons that get wrapped up into that. And then you have these awesome moments. My favorite homeschool moments as a mom are like just those validating moments are the other day. I was talking to my son and so we're doing a math lesson and I was like, I use curriculum more as a support and I kind of go through and be like, oh, we haven't taught this. I should probably put some more focus in this area, right? And so there's a lesson on fractions. It was like multiplying fractions and reducing fractions. And so I started this video for him and he's like, Mom, this is so boring. I already know how to do this. And I was like, really? Okay. He's like, try me, Mom. So I gave him a bunch of different problems and he was like, Mom, you gotta give me something harder than that. These are too easy. And so I gave him harder problems and asked him, to reduce those fractions. And he was totally able to do it because we've been able to wait until his brain was more developed, that those concepts came more easily to him. And so that has been really something I found often is that if we wait until their brain is more ready to receive a lesson, they'll pick it up faster. And they're already picking it up in ways that I didn't notice before. And so they learn so much more quickly and effectively. And because they want to be there and they want to be learning, they have a better attitude about it because they're not just forced to sit through another lesson. And then they just pick up on things and retain them so much better. So that's a very roundabout answer to your question of what our day looks like. But we also do a mix of we do a couple of different co-ops and we do sports. And so we have 2 days of co-ops and then we have 3 days of schooling at home and my kids do Taekwondo. And this last week, we were able to volunteer at a food bank. So we went and we harvested crops for a food bank for a couple of hours. And it's great because we had such good conversations about people who were less fortunate, who don't have enough money to pay for the food for their families. And so they got to serve. And then we also got to actually bring home food for ourselves too. And so we picked a bunch for the food bank and then we got to bring some home. And so now we're working on preserving that. So there's so many good opportunities that I feel like we can capitalize on because we don't have to be sitting in a chair in school for so many hours. We have more time to capitalize on the 2-hour service opportunity that is so much learning and so much good stuff that comes from it that we just simply wouldn't have time for if they had to be in a chair at school all the time,
This is incredible. I love the way that you teach, and I love you calling out the fact that when you intentionally live, and first off, it starts with when you are patient enough to start understanding your kids, start understanding what they need. For example, whenever you're talking about your daughter and her need to understand spacing and her need to understand tidiness and her need to focus on that, because that's the kind of human that you want to raise, is somebody that doesn't have an issue, right, with these important things, but understands how to choose it, understands, okay, like this may not come naturally to me, but I can build the habit of this. Or like I can start to recognize what this looks like. Recognizing first in your kids the things that they struggle with, and then recognizing just in the day to day what can be an opportunity for growth or what can be an opportunity for just like conscious learning. I think that's so understated and valuable because I think it's so easy for everybody to get in their heads about education being, the core subjects, education being you're learning information and that's it. But that's
Mhm.
not necessarily education. That's not the end of education, at least. And I love also the fact that when you're talking about the food bank, the fact that your kids get to not just experience this awesome opportunity to serve and to, what's it called? You said, what was the exact thing that y'all were doing?
So we actually did 3 different harvests. So we picked corn and pears and strawberries. And so they were all very
Oh my
different
gosh, that's so
organization.
cool.
Like there were different opportunities for all of them.
That's so cool. So y'all were harvesting. And what
Hmm.
I find often happens, especially in school and especially in other places, is you don't get to see the cycle. And this is just normal human things. Like there's so much happening. I don't know if you've read the I pencil idea, the economics story where it's basically like this is every single thing that had to happen for a pencil to be created. And it's just this
Mm-hmm.
long, long, long list of tons of humans working together. But like for your kids to see multiple steps in that cycle where it's like, okay, so we're going to harvest. Somebody else did the initial part. They grew the food, they started this business. Now we're going to harvest and we're going to send it to these other people who are going to send it to people in need. And then we're also going to take some back. It's like you start to see how things connect. And I think that's also really important for kids is it's not just, line, okay, done. And like the process ends. Like all of life is, a cycle. There's so many things that happen, so many things that connect. And like the perspective that you get to give them through all of these things that you're doing, I think it's underrated. This is a lesson even for me. It's underrated how valuable sometimes just being somewhere and being present and like giving something your time and actually saying,
Yeah.
okay, how can I learn here? Has that impacted you as a parent as well? Just being able to sit with them and pull those things out. Do you feel like you're learning alongside them all the time as well?
Love the most about this idea of open education is I want my kids to be lifelong learners. I don't want them to feel like, okay, school's over, the bell rang, we're done learning now, right? Like I had a great public school experience, but that was very much like, oh, it's summertime. I'm not doing work. Like I'm not doing any educational stuff. Or school is out. Like if I don't have homework, like why would I be reading like an educational book? Like why would I be trying to learn something? And so at our house, there's just a constant attitude of we're always learning. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't matter if it's Saturday or if it's nighttime. In fact, like we largely just school year round because it's what works best for like our family for a lot of different reasons. But I also feel like it fosters that attitude of we're just always learning. And if we live intentionally, there's so much more to be learned while you're doing the same things. You still have to drive home. You might as well have a good conversation about what happened that was meaningful during while you did that event. You can do those same things that take the same amount of time, but just do it a little more on purpose and get so much more out of it.
I love that. One of the things that you mentioned before we started recording was for you what homeschooling was like and how important patience has been in your journey and the struggles that you encountered or the fears that you encountered. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah. In fact, one thing I feel like I often hear when I tell people that we're homeschooling is I often get some version of, oh, good for you. I could never do that. And I think to myself, I don't necessarily feel like I'm this great parent. It's like I feel like I've had to develop the skills that I needed to so that I could serve my kids in the way they needed to be served. Because we felt like when we looked at everything, homeschool is the right choice for our family right now. And so if that's the case, then I need to do everything on my end so that I can be the parent that they need me to be. That's meant a lot of learning for me, like building patience. I feel like homeschooling is a very refining process because you're always together, right? Like we love each other and we're together all the time, all the time. And so it's easy to get on each other's nerves or to lose patience. And so I feel like it's just forced me to realize the areas where I needed to make some shifts. I needed to learn how to handle things better or to teach things better or more about how the brain works so that I could be able to meet my kids where they're at and just what their needs are. So I feel like learning on my end, being intentional in my own education process has not only helped me be a better parent and a better teacher, but it also shows my kids that we're still learning, that we don't stop just because we graduate. Um, and so I'm still working on developing, like my kids see me develop my own hobbies, or like I'm always listening to audiobooks because I really do love learning. I think it's such a great opportunity. And if I'm going to wash dishes, I might as well wash dishes and learn something while I'm doing it. And so I love that my kids get to see that I value learning because that also shows them that they should value learning too. And so there's just been so many things that I've had a lot of opportunities to make adjustments on so that I could be the kind of parent and the kind of teacher and the kind of example that they need me to be. And I didn't have it all figured out ahead of time. Before I started, I'm figuring it out as I go. And that is awesome because it also helps us in our relationships. And I feel like it's so worthwhile for my kids to see me come back and apologize and be like, you know what, I did not handle this the way that I should have. And to learn, for them to see my own learning processes that they get to be a part of. And it helps us to strengthen our relationships and to be more forgiving. And just, there's just so many valuable skills as we're here just trying to live on purpose.
I absolutely love that. What resources have been very valuable to you as you've been going through this journey? And especially like in the challenging moments, maybe with your son and his ADHD and your family and their ADHD, or what has been something that you consistently turn back to and use again and again?
For me, it's looking at things as tools and being able to have a lot of tools available to me. So with OpenEd, I love the homeschool, the homeroom resources because, and especially like with ADHD, it really helps when we can mix things up and not have things just be all the same all the time because we have some basic structure that's really helpful. But I feel like when I have more tools that I can fall back on, it makes it easier to be able to still achieve the goals that we want. So for us, it looks like we do 2 different co-ops. They're very different experiences. They have very different focuses. And I love it because they get to see very different things and learn very different things at both co-ops. At home, we use curriculum as like sometimes we're there and we're going through specific lessons. Sometimes I'm just using it as more of a checkpoint for me so that I can be able to make sure I know like some things that they should be learning around that age theoretically, like, or they would be learning in public school. And then I'm like, oh yeah, that's a great point. I should be like, put a little emphasis on that topic. So being able to use curriculum as checkpoints or fallbacks to kind of help you along the way. And then one thing I love at my house is with OpenEd, we get math-based camp and my kids love it. And so instead of turning on the TV because I need to go take a break, they can just go play math-based camp. And so it's the little things like that where we do education.com and reading eggs. When we're more aware of just those different things that are out there, I feel like it just makes more room to fall back into things that are helpful. Like if we're having a rough day, we have sitting next to my game cabinet over here, and we have so many educational games that maybe I suddenly need to take a phone call or something like that. And so we're trying to do math, but I'm interrupted. But if I have some great learning games available, then they can go pick a math game to play. So we have little containers for each subject that if we need to fall back on it, I can say like, go pick something out of the math container to do. Go pick something out of language arts, or we have one that says variety, one that says science. And so that way, because I know my own weaknesses, and I know that there's going to be those times where something comes up and our school gets derailed for whatever reason. And so when I can fall back on something simple and easy, then it makes it so they can still learn what they need to in a way that I know is going to work with our needs.
That's so helpful. I love the idea of the game containers. I would not have thought of that, but I think that's an incredible idea.
It's been really helpful. And at first, when I started my homeschool journey, I was very much like, this is what school should look like. Because I know that when suddenly things get derailed, if I don't have something good to fall back on, then we'll just get distracted. So if I can at least give an open-ended, like, all right, kids, go this direction, then it just has been really helpful to make sure that we still touch bases on the things that we need. And I think that has been one of the most helpful things for me, is learning, like being really aware of what my weaknesses are so that I can be equipped to deal with them in a way that my family can still have their needs met. And that doesn't happen if you're not aware of it, right?
Yeah, that's a really important point. The last thing that I wanted to touch on before I hit you with a couple of rapid fire questions and let you get back to your day. So you are a parent ambassador in Oregon. Congratulations. And also
Thank you.
shout out. This is awesome. This, everybody will know by now, by when this comes out, that you're going to be a parent ambassador. What that means that you are going to be at events and other things, and also you're in on the socials and you have a lot of answers to things, and you're just going to be connecting with a lot of parents. You've already attended some events. What are the things that have stuck out to you about kind of the state of homeschooling, both in Oregon and also just like what families are going through right now, that you would either have tips on, or something that you consistently answer questions about that you're just like, this is something that a lot of parents are asking?
I feel like in Oregon, there's a lot of interest. For people are looking. People are not satisfied with what's happening in schools. It works for some people, and I'm so glad we have public schools, because it really is a huge added value to a lot of people that don't have other options. But there's a lot of people who are feeling frustrated with the traditional education style that their kids, like, they feel like is their only option. Then you have like families that are just trying to figure it out. I feel like I get so many new families that are new to homeschooling because they just knew it needed to happen, but they didn't know how to do it. And so they're trying to figure it all out. I think Oregon is great in that it has so many different charter opportunities, that there's like online charters and like OpenEd. But the challenge with the online charters is that there's so many requirements. And that's the thing that is really hard for a lot of parents, is feeling like they have to meet all of these different requirements, and that it's actually taking away from their ability to take time to educate their kids, instead of being able to use it as a resource to really empower their kids' education. And that's what I really love about OpenEd, because OpenEd has really been a huge resource for me, so that I feel like I could really maximize my kids' educational opportunities, because there are so many resources through like room resources, or just being able to have that funding so that we can be able to go to museums and like have different memberships to the zoo, to the museums, like pay for so many different classes. That's one of the things that I think is so great that came from the pandemic, is that so many things went online, things that people didn't want to do online, but then they were suddenly forced to. And so you can find all kinds of classes online now, and whether it's through YouTube or just different co-ops, different classes. I feel like there's like, especially just going through like local moms groups, or like there's the Parents of Oregon Charter Schools is a really good Facebook group as well, where there's just so ways to get so much more information about different things that are out there that can be really helpful. Because yeah, there's so many different things that I feel like classes that you can access that really help me to be able to teach the things that maybe like I struggle to teach. I think that there's more and more homeschool classes as well, like PE classes or like gymnastics or martial arts will have like actual homeschool hours, which is really nice and something to look for in your area. But I do feel like it's a struggle with charters, with public schools because people are feeling frustrated with the environment and with all of the requirements that teachers need to teach that they need to touch on with curriculum or the things that they can or can't talk about. And then they're not able to get to all the things that they want to, like our kids really need to be learning. And it's tricky because there's so many parents feeling that dissatisfaction that there's so many kids leaving the public school system, and that's hard for public schools and their funding issues because they want to be able to pay for their teachers and their classes and have the needs of their students met, but doing it in the traditional learning style is just not working as well. And I think a lot of parents are really feeling that, and now the schools are feeling it too because there's so many people who are leaving the school system. And so it's tricky because there's a lot of school districts that are trying to kind of clamp down a little bit more so that kids aren't leaving as readily and maybe even make it a little bit harder for kids to leave. So that's tricky. But there's definitely a ton of resources out there. And biased as I may be, I have to say, I think OpenEd is the best one. So
What is your favorite part about it, out of curiosity? Because I know that like the hard part is whenever you're a parent doing this, there are so many resources available. Trying to figure out, okay, what's the best one? Trying to do all your research. That's honestly quite tough. If you were to talk to one of your friends about OpenEd, well, how would you explain it to them?
okay, I feel like OpenEd has really it partners with the school district so that you can be able to access the funding to really make the most of your kids' education. That's like that's how I feel about OpenEd is it gives me access to those educational tax dollars so that I can be able to get reimbursed lots of educational expenses for my kids. So instead of just trying to like do it on the cheap, get by with what I can really take that funding and maximize the educational opportunities through being able to pay for classes or field trips, curriculum, supplies, all of those things. So my short answer is it's a great way to just be able to get the funding that you need so you can make the most of your homeschooling experience instead of just kind of slide by as cheap as you can, you know?
Yeah, no, I love that framing. Okay, so now last thing, I'm gonna hit you with a couple of rapid fire questions, and you can just give me the first thought on your mind or the first thing that comes to your mind. But first question: what stories or examples do you have that that you could share of something that really works to help your kids learn?
Life skills, like life application. When I actually find ways to show my kids that these skills have value. And again, it goes back to that intentional living, right? So today we were talking about, so my kids have a farmer's market, and that has been huge for us. And I'll circle back to that in a second. They want to do another event. And so I had to write a check today to pay for their booth fee. And so part of writing a check, you have to actually like write out how to spell the numbers, right? So when I was showing that to my kids, like we have to write out 25, like you have to actually know how to spell it to put it on the check. And so when you can find things that they're learning about that actually apply to real life, I feel like that just makes the stuff you're learning about so much more palatable. Otherwise, it's just a thing in the book your mom's making you do, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And for us, doing things that tie into their passions is really helpful as well. So we're doing this farmer's market, and it has been so great because my kids really wanted to sell stuff. And it's hard to have, like, to sell things as a kid, right? It's one thing to sell to your friends and family. It's another thing to make, like, actual money from other people who don't know you and don't have all of the sympathy feels to buy your stuff, right? So we got a 3D printer and have been like having this farmer's market all summer long. And it has been so great because my kids have been developing so many valuable skills, one of them being counting money. And frequently they will have people stop, they count the money back to their customers. And I'll have adults stop and look at my kids and be like, you can count money back better than some 20-year-olds I know. And it's great because my kids feel so great about it and they're learning such valuable skills. So finding a way to teach skills in a way that is interesting to them and actually has real life application has been huge for education at our house.
I love that. Can you give me one more story of your kids finding something that they're passionate about and just like the way that they've been able to dive into it because of their open education flexibility?
Oh, okay. One thing I remember is when my son and I were first getting into division, and he loves Star Wars. And so we spend a lot of time in the car doing a lot of driving. And so for math, we're just doing some practice questions. And so I was giving him questions about like if we had 10 stormtroopers and we needed to have 2 armies, then how many stormtroopers would be in each army? Or, if they all need a lightsaber, then like just finding ways to include their interests in the problems. Like suddenly it's actually an enjoyable conversation because they're thinking about stormtroopers and lightsabers and Jedis. And if there's 40 people in the army and and it's evenly split between Jedis and stormtroopers, then how many are in each army? Then like suddenly they just have so much more reason to actually care about it and take interest in it. So being able to find ways to really include the things that they're excited about in the examples and the practice lessons has been really helpful.
Oh my gosh, I love that example of the stormtroopers.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, next rapid fire question. What is your best advice for new open education parents?
Be patient with yourself and realize it's going to change. It doesn't matter what it is. It's going to change, right? It could be your kid's attitude. It could be your curriculum choices, your schedule, your patience. Whatever it is, it's going to change. So you have to be willing to work with it and find areas that you can make things better, but give yourself grace because it's going to change, and give yourself grace and give your kids grace. We're all trying to learn and we're still figuring it out, right? And don't get too frustrated if things aren't working out the way that you want them to right now, because it's going to change. Whether it's a new day, whether it's a new schedule, curriculum, learning styles, attitudes, whether they're good today or bad today, it'll be different tomorrow. Don't worry about it. It just is always changing, and you just have to learn to work with it.
Great advice. Last rapid fire question. What do you see being a challenge next year that's different from this year? Maybe it's something either trend related, world related, just individual family related. What do you anticipate as some challenges that are upcoming?
I think as my son gets a little bit older, being able to plug him into the right resources to make sure that he is learning all the really important skills that he does need to learn that are a little more academic. Like there's so many foundational skills that we're working on right now that he has great character and all of these really valuable things that are going to set him up so he can be a great person and a great adult in the future. But now we're kind of moving into the little bit deeper academic side of things that I definitely appreciate being able to have more specific resources for. So plugging into the right classes and opportunities and figuring out exactly what that needs to look like is probably what will be our challenge for next year.
That's a great answer. How do you know? So you mentioned that like the idea of what should they be learning. How do you know when to challenge them and when not to? When it's like, okay, we're just not going to do this right now versus no, I actually think he's capable of this. I'm going to push him to do this right now.
That's a great question. In the moment, I feel like it's kind of a more long-term answer. Like in the moment, if they're really dysregulated, then you might just need to just step away. And I often will, if I'm trying to teach a specific lesson and it's just not going over well, then I will usually give them space to get re-regulated, whether they need to go exercise for 10 minutes or go play with Legos or whatever it is to kind of get regrouped. And then we'll try again. And if they're just really, really not grasping it, then it's usually something I will circle back to later. If it's something they're frustrated about, I'm okay with frustration. Like, I'm okay with being in the struggle if they're getting it. Like, if it's hard, it's okay. But if we're getting to that meltdown point, then something's got to change, because even if they are developmentally able to grasp it, they won't hold on to it if they're just frustrated and mad anyways. I would say if it's not just hard, but it's getting to the point where they're stalling out. Like for me, for my ADHD kids, like that's a big one, is when they just feel like their wheels are just spinning and they're not getting anywhere. Then I know, like, we need to take a break. We need, and then if we circle back to it a time or two again and it's still just not working, then maybe I'll put that to the side and touch base on it more later. But I find oftentimes if I am just touching lightly on it, and then I can like kind of go a little deeper and see if they grab onto it. And if they do, then we can run with that more. And if they're like just really not grasping a topic or not interested in it, then often it's just kind of something I'll circle back to later and kind of see how things are going. But yeah, it is a hard line to know sometimes when to really push and when to realize we'll just come back to this. But I'm
No,
okay
this
with hard. That's my short answer. Hard is okay, but if it's just frustration that's not going anywhere, then it's a good time to wait. Come back to it later.
that's a great answer. The difference between hard, well, the difference between something that you are like basically pushing against a brick wall, it's like, okay, this is not valuable, versus, hey, I'm rolling a stone up a hill and it's hard, but it's worth it, and this is the objective and this is the end goal, and we're going to do it, and we're going to do it together. I love it. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and for sharing so much of your wisdom. It's definitely valuable to hear everything that you have been learning, all the things that you're doing with your kids. There were so many little nuggets in there, from the little game containers to the way that you bring learning into your everyday life, to the way that even you reevaluate the question of like, okay, how are we going to educate this year? And really sit with the question of what is best for my family this year. Maybe what's best for each kid this year. But yeah, I think this was an awesome interview. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been great. Thanks for chatting.